So in this video, I wanted to walk you through exercise 10-4, which looks at our building both a flexible budget, which compares actual cost at the same level of activity based on our budgeted numbers, so that we can compare apples and apples and look at those differences. So this problem gives us some information up here, tells us some of those variable costs per unit, and then gives us some of the fixed costs as well as our actual costs that we're looking for during this month. So the actual column is very simple. I'm only going to fill in the information that I'm given, and this is all based on our direct labor hours, so I'm going to pick that. Then I'm going to go into my variable costs, and I'm just going to list out those variable costs. I have some indirect labor, I have some indirect materials, I have some utilities, I have then the total variable costs. Let's start with that, and then we'll get into those in the next column, which is our fixed costs. But let's start here before we start scrolling up and down and I lose you. So our actual costs are based on 9,000 hours. Now all I gotta do is put in those numbers for those actual costs, which were 8,800, 5,800, 3,200, for a total variable cost of 17,800. Then I want to build that budget based on those same direct labor hours, which are 9,000. So if I look up, and this is where the scrolling is going to happen a little bit, those indirect labor costs per unit is $1. So I'm just going to take that $1 and multiply it by the 9,000 hours. For the indirect materials, that's 70 cents. So if I take the 900 hours and I multiply that by my 70 cents per hour, that's going to give me 6,300. And I'm going to take that number and put it in to my budgeted amount. The utilities, same thing, it's 40 cents. So again, based on that 9,000 hours, times that by my 40 cents, and that's going to give me a total of 3,600. I'm going to input that in. I can add those up for a total variable cost of 18,900, right? So now what they want us to do is look at the differences. I'm going to take my budgeted amount, look at my actual costs, and put in the number here that's different. We can all subtract. That's all I'm doing here, looking at that, subtracting, taking budget minus actual, 400, for a grand total of 1,100. Now, when we're looking at favorable versus unfavorable, this is kind of a bad example because everything is positive, everything happened was good, but I'm looking at cost. Did I spend less than I thought I should have, which is a good thing. So all of these are going to be favorable because I spent less than I thought I was going to have to, and that's a good thing. So now let's pull in those fixed costs. When we're looking at budgeting our fixed costs, because this is not based on a per unit, these don't change. So I have supervision, then I have my depreciation, and I have my property taxes for my total fixed costs. Put in my actual figures here, just pulling these from above. Property taxes are 800, giving me that grand total of 6,000. Now, my budgeted amounts don't change. they'll have to tell you if something happened where my actual costs are different than my budgeted, but in your fixed expenses, this should not happen. So that should be grand total of 6,000, giving us big whopping zeros all the way down here. And finally, when I look at if these variances are favorable or unfavorable, it's neither, because there is no difference. So really the whole exercise here, this is going to be favorable, is looking at, can you build that flexible budget out? If I look at my total costs, then I'm just going to add up those variable and the fixed costs for a total difference. Let's scroll this up a little bit. 24,900 versus 23,800. And that variance is going to be the same as my variable costs of 1,100, which is still favorable. So again, the whole idea here is to bring in that flexible budget concept and then be able to compare our budgeted to actual costs. So let's just do this one more. So I don't have to scroll up and down. I'm going to remind myself over here that my indirect labor costs are $1. My indirect materials were 70 cents, and my utilities were 40 cents. That way I won't have to scroll up and down so much. So when I come down here, and I'm going to build a whole nother budget, but this one's based on 8,500 direct labor hours. Those costs, those actual costs, even though we're changing the labor hours, those actual costs stay in place. That's actually what happens. So we're just going to put all those numbers back in. So those should be the same as above. Oh. Utilities. Oh, no, they're not. But they got there the same way. So that first one, oh shoot, 58, 32. Okay, yeah, we're on the right track. Just making sure. Giving me that total cost, 17,800. Then I'm going to look at my fixed costs, and I'll fill in the other pieces later. I'm just copying from above without scrolling back and forth, so I might be getting these numbers wrong. 800, total of 6,000, and that grand total of 23,800. All right, let's fill in the text so that we can follow along. That first one, we're looking at our indirect labor hours, or our direct labor hours. And then we're going to list out all of our variable costs. We're going to look at our indirect labor, our indirect materials, our utilities, and our total variable costs. Then we'll take a look at those fixed costs. Fixed costs are supervision and depreciation, property taxes for that total fixed cost, and finally those total costs. Again, building out that flexible budget, this time it's based on 8,500 hours, therefore my indirect labor being $1 per hour should come in at 8,500. Those indirect materials, these a little harder to do in my head. 8,500, those are at 70 cents, so that should be $59.50. Looking at the utilities, again, I'm going to take the number of hours, times that by my variable cost per unit, and I should get 3,400, giving me that grand total of 17,850. Again, my fixed costs aren't going to change, so I'm just going to copy down exactly what my actual amounts are, giving me a grand total here of 23,850. So I'm going to look at my variances now. Here I have $300 difference, but you notice I'm not putting a negative or a positive. I'm just going to say because my actual costs are higher, this is unfavorable. The difference here is 150. Here, the actual costs are lower, so that's going to be favorable. Under utilities, the difference is 200. Again, my actual costs are lower, which gives me a favorable difference. And then finally here, my difference is 50. I've actually paid less than I thought I was going to, so that gives me a favorable outcome. All the differences here are going to be 0, with neither favorable or unfavorable. Giving me a grand total difference of that same thing as my variable cost, and the outcome is the same. So the trick here is just building out that flexible budget, comparing those numbers. Don't get lost into negatives and positives. Look at what I paid versus what I thought I was going to pay, and you should be fine with these problems.